Okay, we're going to get started. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to see you, and thank you for joining us. I'm really excited about tonight's class because we're going to be talking about a topic that I feel is very often on parents' minds and also really lays the groundwork for many other positive developments in our children. And that is the idea of self-esteem and building in our children a positive self-value. So we're going to be looking at from Judaism's point of view, what is Judaism's point of view with regard to self-esteem in general, and how we can cultivate that positive self-view in our children. So in terms of just to take a moment to look back at some of the things that we've been discussing so far in our previous classes, we've been talking a lot about the important role that parents play as parents in guiding and raising their children, and that this is our real, true, essential responsibility when it comes to being parents of our children, and also about the importance of focusing on what our children need. It's not about us, but rather about them. In our last class, we looked at the theme of authority and ways in which we can, raise our children with healthy sense of authority versus unhealthy sense of, using unhealthy parental authority. So, for example, when children ask us, but why do I have to do something? So we looked at a variety of different texts, and essentially what emerged was that from Judaism's point of view, there's a need for balance. So it is important for children to know that sometimes there isn't going to be an explanation. There's a parent, and the parent is in a position of authority, and they can say, this is what needs to get done. This is the expectation. It doesn't always have to be an explanation along with it, because otherwise children become too dependent on it. At the same time, if you recall the last text that we read from Rabbi Shan Rafal Hirsch, it was really beautiful language of how we describe that children need to see that parents make decisions about, raising their children or about things in the household thoughtfully, mindfully, not just a rash decision that comes from an emotional place. They should see that there really is a process that goes into it, and that when we can say yes to our children, we do so joyfully. And when children see that, yes, there will be times where there will be, no explanation. It's because I'm the parent and I have a responsibility to raise you in the best way possible. That Hashem has given me this responsibility. And at the same time, they also knowing that that there will be explanations. And sometimes we do explain to our children the reasoning. What was interesting also, and this is going to lead into tonight's class, is that we spent some time talking about that when we're doing things, the reasoning behind why we explain to a child why something needs to be done, if we leave it only to the reasoning being this is better for you, we create a mindset in the child where things have to be self-serving. And if it meets their own needs, then that's a reason to do it. But that's not necessarily in the long term a healthy way for a child to grow up. And that it's important for children to be raised with a sense of mission and purpose, that there's a bigger picture here. There is a divine authority. The authority is not just, me as a parent, but there is a higher purpose to our lives. And, when we're have to make decisions, whether it's, cheating on a test versus, or not using drugs, the reason to do that, to not do these things, is not only because of the consequences to ourselves personally, but also because of it doesn't fulfill our divine mission and purpose in life. And this really will lead to a unique approach that Judaism presents with regard to self-esteem, which I'm really I'm excited to share with you and explore. So tonight's class, lesson 4, we're more than halfway through the course, is competence and confidence. So I think it's important for us to take a moment to step back and recognize that the entire question about how to raise a child with positive self-esteem and positive self-image is one that is new. It's a modern dilemma. You know, our grandparents, great-grandparents, when they were raising their children in a variety of different, settings, they were focused on first other needs when it came to raising their children, making sure there was food to eat, that people were safe, there was clothing. The simple basic needs were the priority. And if we look at this this chart, which is Dr. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when we have our physiological needs met, we feel safe, our basic social needs are met, only then do we have room or space to look at self-esteem or self-actualization. And this is a dilemma that, thank God, we are blessed to live in a time where we're able to raise our children in a general sense of safety and security. And suddenly now we have a new dilemma or need in terms of our parenting to focus on how does our child view themselves, which may be our parents' generation or grandparents' generation didn't look at parenting from this perspective, but we need to from the position that our children are in today, because in order for them to be successful in their adult lives, self-esteem and having a positive view of themselves is very, very important, because this does lead the next layer beyond that is self-actualization, which is what it takes to live a meaningful and happy life, which is what we want for our children. So to describe the importance of self-esteem, I wanted to share just a cute little Chelm story. So the story goes that the citizens of Chelm, if you followed Chelm stories, you'll know there's like a certain genre and a style to them. So the citizens of Chelm heard about the first locomotives and the trains, and they're like, the horseless carriage, and they're convinced that it's not possible. It can't be. There must be horses somewhere leading these trains. So they sent the rabbi as a representative to go to the town, like main city, to find out where are the tiny mini horses hidden under this train that is pulling it, because it can't work otherwise. So the rabbi leaves Chelm. He comes back a few weeks later to report on his investigative journey, and all the townspeople gathered around, so excited to find out, what did the rabbi uncover? And the rabbi says, I almost figured out the problem, the dilemma of how these trains are moving. I went and I looked at the trains up on the top, on the side, all around. I think I figured it out, but not quite. But let me tell you where I'm holding so far in my investigation. So I started at the back. I went to the last train, and I looked all around, and I can tell you there's no horses anywhere there. It's not being pulled by horses. But I was trying to figure out what's pulling it, and then I realized that the last train is connected to the car right in front of it. So when the car in front of it, let's say car number 18, moves, then it pulls car number 19. So I figured that part out. Then I spent another whole day looking at that car. Look, there's no horses. What's moving it? It's connected to the car beforehand, and so on. I went investigating for days each and every single car, and I solved the mystery that each one is pulled by the car right in front. I'm almost at the end of my investigation, but I'm stuck because I got to the first car, the head, and I can't figure out what makes it move. But I need to go back to town and look further into this. So it's a good example of this idea that there is to every issue, there is one issue, like one factor that pulls the rest of the train. And self-esteem and positive self-image is that first car. When that is in place, many, many other things follow. And this is not just in relation to children, but also in relation to adults. So we're going to look at the first text in the student textbook. It's text 1 on page 96. We have here a passage from a book written by a psychologist. It's called Self-Esteem. And he states, self-esteem is essential for psychological survival. It is an emotional sine qua non. Judging and rejecting yourself causes enormous pain. And in the same way that you would favor and protect a physical wound, you find yourself avoiding anything that might aggravate the pain of self-rejection in any way. You take fewer social, academic, or career risks. You make it more difficult for yourself to meet people, interview for a job, or push hard for something where you might not succeed. You limit your ability to open yourself with others, be the center of attention, hear criticism, ask for help, or solve problems. To avoid more judgments and self-rejection, you erect barriers of defense. Perhaps you blame and get angry, or bury yourself in perfectionist work. Or you brag, or you make excuses. Sometimes you turn to alcohol or drugs. Does this resonate with you? What are your thoughts about this text? What do you feel, have you seen in your personal experience in life to be true about the importance of self-esteem? Or is there something with regard to why self-esteem is important that hasn't been touched on in this particular passage? Anyone want to share what you think about this text? Do you agree that self-esteem is really that first essential train that leads to everything else?
I mean, I think that self-esteem is really important because if you have the confidence that you're going to succeed or that you have the ability to do something, it's going to make you want to try those things as opposed to if you're always thinking, oh, I'm going to fail at this, I'm going to mess this up, then you'll be timid to do something and you'll never take any risks to grow and get better.
Right. So definitely lack of self-esteem creates a sense of fear. Because if I already see myself as fragile, then why would I take a risk that perhaps would damage me further? In order to be able to take risks, you have to have enough confidence in yourself that if I'm going to fail, it's not going to, I'll still be me. I won't become any less than I am if I fail at this. And those risks, the ability to take risks impacts everything from your relationships, being comfortable to, ask someone out on a date or go for a job, a tryout for a higher job. And it also just basic, functioning on a day-to-day basis. And it also has many other ramifications, especially and particularly in terms of relationships, which we're going to talk about more shortly. But it also has an effect even on a spiritual and religious level, which is interesting. So we'll look at text 2. This is a text from a Hasidic rabbi. It's on page 97, and he writes something so beautiful from Judaism's point of view. There's sometimes, and Judaism has a very unique view on self-esteem. Sometimes self-esteem can be taken to an extreme, which can almost seem like bragging or creating an inflated sense of ego. That is not what Judaism is talking about when we're talking about self-esteem. So what does Judaism see? Because from the Torah point of view, ego and self-inflation and showing off, bragging, these are very negative character traits. But what does the Torah see as the important need of positive self-value? So we have this text here from a Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Tzadok, and this is what he says. Just as we must believe in God, we must also believe in ourselves. What a powerful statement. Believing in one God is like the foundational belief of Judaism. That's what made Avram the first Jew was because he made this realization that there is only one creator God in the world, even though everyone else said that's not the case. So this is the seminal belief of Judaism. And here we're being told that just as we must believe in God, we must also believe in ourselves. We must believe that God cares about us, that we are not worthless laborers, that we possess divine souls, and that God takes pleasure and joy when we fulfill his desire. And what basically, we see here is that even from a spiritual and religious point of view, if a person doesn't have a positive view of himself, doesn't feel the sense of empowerment, you read this language, it's very empowering, then they can't build that connection, to God, or see that their actions matter. Because why should I bother if I am nothing and if I'm worthless and my actions are meaningless and worthless? Then why should I bother doing mitzvot? Why would my, positive action have any meaningful impact on the world in a transformative way? So from Judaism's point of view, believing in yourself and in your ability to make a positive impact in the world, and believing that you are loved, cared for by God, and that that everything that you do brings joy and pleasure to Hashem and fulfills a greater divine purpose, is the foundational core of what self-esteem looks like, and that is necessary and a foundation for everything in terms of Judaism. So
one, I guess, quick question, from my end is, if I think about self-esteem or self-confidence, I think before you have self-confidence, you need to actually have a foundational, knowledge or awareness. So I wonder if self-esteem and potentially maybe self-confidence are two different things. I don't know. Self-esteem maybe is more of a natural personality trait, but confidence.
You already kind of like you opened up the key. You already yes, really. First of all, self-esteem in and of itself can mean different things. Has been defined in different ways, but really self-esteem does have and come with two components. One being competency, and the second being intrinsic value.
Right, exactly. Competency was the word I was looking for.
Yeah. And that's why the title of this class is Competence and Confidence. Because they really do need both of them. And what we're
Perfect.
Look at, yeah, you're there.
I joined late.
But that's exactly what we're going to try to understand, is how to build this in for our kids. But what we see here just from this particular text is that the need for self-esteem is even linked, from a religious point of view, is just like the foundation of, just like we have to believe in Hashem himself. So now we're gonna actually digress for a minute before talking more about self-esteem, and we're gonna look at what happens when there's, on the extreme end, when there's a lack of self-esteem. But before doing that, we're gonna take a little we're going to take a look at this cute little cartoon. All right, so this is an example paradigm of low self-esteem. Dear diary, sorry to be bothering you again. So this is what that fear looks like. So this lack of self-esteem not only creates, let's say, as you were talking before, Alex, of lack of willingness to take risks, but it also creates this constant apologetic tone. Even when you're writing to your diary, for example. But let's take a minute, just take a reflective moment and ask yourself, if you think about your child or your different children, and different kids are different, how would you rate their overall self-esteem? This is just a personal moment of personal reflection. Do you feel their overall self-esteem is healthy and robust, average, or weak and needs improvement? Just take a moment and think about that, and keep that in the back of your mind. Like, when I think about my kids. Okay, now one of the extreme manifestations of a lack of self-esteem is something that is a very big hot topic among parents and educators and anyone who works with children, and that is bullying. And it is an association, not necessarily there. It's not about causation. One doesn't necessarily cause the other, because there could be many other factors, but there is a documented link between the way that, the state of a child's self-esteem, and also even adults, and the type of unhealthy relationship and dynamic that happens with bullying. So here's just a short little clip. that we'll watch. Hope it will work.
So devastated. I just found out that my 8-year-old daughter has been bullied for over a year by a girl in our class. We recently moved to a new neighborhood, and Nancy had to change schools. She was always such a happy, sociable child. She had so many friends. She was my social butterfly. The first few months after the move, I noticed that she was walking a little slumped over, and she told me she hated school. She would get over it, but it would take a little time for her to adjust. But it turns out that this girl has made her life a misery, calling her names, telling her that the girls in the class hate her, even pushing her around.
Listen up, everyone. Nancy Schmancy is trying to say something. Listen to her strange accent. You're weird.
I'm not sure what to do. On the one hand, I know I have to put a stop to it. And on the other, I need to rebuild my child's self-esteem. How would you react?
So there we have it. I think this is really, if you've ever been in a situation where one of your children was experiencing this, it's really very challenging to face, to deal with bullying. But let's take a moment to actually first define bullying, because this is something that both children and adults often, use the term not necessarily in the correct way. But we're going to look for a second at these. There's 3 scenarios here, okay? And we have basically, let's think about which of these behaviors would we qualify as bullying behavior, okay? We'll do like a little self-assessment, and then we're going to actually look at the definition of bullying. So, okay, grabbing toys from a younger sibling. Let's say you have a 6-year-old is always, then he has an old, a younger sibling. 4, 5-year-old, and the older child is constantly grabbing toys away from them, okay? Then you have a situation where you have a kid, let's say a middle schooler, all right, who's regularly humiliates children who are less popular, along with, his or her posse of friends. Okay, would that be bullying? Or you have another situation, which is where you have, again, maybe siblings, when they're playing together and they're frustrated, and they'll lash out when they're upset. Basically, like one child will, like, if he's angry, he'll start like hitting, pulling hair, whatever your child's weapon of choice is, right? Every kid has their shtick. So which of these would really fall under the category of bullying? Now, many times children will use the word bullying for all of this. He's bullying me. She's bullying me. I was bullied. But there's a difference between bullying and children fighting or aggressive behavior. It's not all aggressive behavior is bullying, and sometimes it does get confused. And they're 2 different things. When a child is being aggressive, that is a matter of the child needing to learn self-control, which that's what, was something which we discussed in an earlier class about the importance of training a child to achieve self-mastery, and how that's a really necessary skill, an important focus of parenting when we're raising our children, because that self-mastery is another really important piece, like another one of those the first car that pulls the rest of the train. But it's different than bullying. Bullying is a very particular and unique type of behavior that not necessarily as all aggressive social interactions fall under the category of bullying. So let's actually look at the text. If anyone has it, would anyone like to volunteer to read the text on page 98? It's text 3.
I can read.
Thank you.
Bullying is unwanted, aggressive behavior among school-age children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. Both kids who are bullied and who bully others may have serious, lasting problems. In order to be considered bullying, the behavior must be aggressive and include the imbalance of power. Kids who bully use their power, such as physical strength, access to embarrassing information, or popularity to control or harm others. Repetition. Bullying behaviors happen more than once or have the potential to happen more than once.
Right, thank you. So this is basically straight out of, stopbullying.gov, a definition of bullying. And this is in the educational or psychological field, this is the standard definition of what defines bullying. So bullying is essentially, if you want to think about it in the adult world, it's an abusive relationship. When you think of adults, when they're in abusive relationships, whether it's domestic or in other kind of abusive relationships, where there's an imbalance of power and one party is using whatever resources they have at their disposal to basically try to control or take power over the other party. So if we look at these three examples, let's say grabbing toys from the younger sibling, it could be that it is actually a bullying dynamic. It's possible. It really depends on multiple factors. If this is, sometimes siblings there's this unhealthy relationship that can happen between siblings where one sibling really is, basically trying to gain control and bullying the other, the other child. And there's really two defining characteristics that make bullying. If you look back at that definition, it's A, an imbalance of power, and B, the repetition. It doesn't happen just one time. It keeps on happening, and it's very targeted. So that could happen between siblings, but not necessarily. Sometimes kids are just, grabbing toys away from a younger sibling, and that's aggressive, and the child needs to learn, how to have self-control. But that's more a matter of character development, personal growth, setting goals, making a chart, offering rewards, motivation, as we spoke about. I think it was in the second class about how to address that. The second example of a middle school age child regularly humiliating less popular kids, like this is classic bullying, definitely, because it's basically a child who is more popular, has the ability and the power, the leverage to be able to humiliate another child. That's an imbalance of power, and when it's regularly, so it's repeated. So it has both of those characteristics. And then the third example of a child, pulling hair, getting mad, hitting, kicking when they're upset. Again, this would not fall into the category of bullying. It's a problem, but it wouldn't qualify as bullying. It's a child who needs to learn self-control. So this is, first I just want to make, anyone have any questions about this definition? With regard to when we're using the term bullying, what are we referring to? Okay, great. Now, what we're going to do is we want to take a minute to look at what are the effects of bullying, because bullying actually affects both children, the child who is bullying and the child who is being bullied. And what's really kind of a high risk factor for both children is linked to and related to how the children view themselves and their own self-esteem. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily the cause, because there could be many other factors. If you grew up in the former Soviet Union and you were picked on because you were Jewish, it had nothing to do with your self-esteem, because you were different. So there are many times other factors, but if those factors are non-existent, then a child who has low self-esteem is at higher risk of either being bullied or becoming a bully and bullying other children. So we're going to look at that. First, before that, we're going to look at what are the risks involved in this. So if we look at text 4a, again, this is also from the same site, effects of bullying. Kids who are bullied can experience negative physical, school, and mental health issues. Kids who are bullied are more likely to experience depression and anxiety, increased feelings of sadness and loneliness, changes in sleep and eating patterns, and loss of interest in activities they used to enjoy. And these issues may persist into adulthood. Unfortunately, it does happen. Health complaints, decreased academic achievement. So kids, it can really have an effect on their school performance, GPA, and standardized test scores, and school participation. They are more likely to miss, skip, or drop out of school. Now, then it goes on to list, if you look at the next text, a bunch of more additional types of behaviors that what happens for a child who's not the victim, right? So these are the risks for the victim. Now what happens, what are the risks for the child who's doing it? Those children are also at risk. Kids who bully others can also engage in violent and other risky behaviors into adulthood. So they have other risks that they could face. Kids who bully are more likely to abuse alcohol and other drugs in adolescence and as adults, get into fights, vandalize property, and drop out of school, engage in early sexual activity, have criminal convictions and traffic citations as adults, be abusive towards their romantic partners, spouses, or children as adults. So really, it's important for us to both, as parents raising our children, to really be tuned into our children's social relationships in terms of making sure, protecting them both from being bullied and also from becoming a bully, because both dynamics of the relationship are unhealthy, problematic, and can have long-lasting impact on a child's development, into adulthood. So this is something that we really want to, be on the lookout for. And as we said, we need to try to understand, what's really behind it. Okay. What causes a child to engage in this type of aggressive behavior, to seek out that power? Why would a child look for, for that power, basically looking for a relationship with this power imbalance and to try to take power away from the other child, and to do so repeatedly? There's a reason. And there's also reasons why children are more at risk of becoming victimized. Bullies tend to look for a particular profile of a type of child, meaning there are certain children that don't end up really getting bullied. And actually, in some psychologists frame it differently, not saying that necessarily that children who have stronger self-esteem, for example, are less likely to be bullied, but rather they're more resilient, so that when they react differently if they are bullied. So if somebody were to try to basically take that, power over them in a negative way, they're more resilient, and therefore they don't continue to perpetuate the cycle of victimhood, and that alone protects them. So it's not that necessarily they wouldn't get bullied ever, it's just they'll deal with it. And when they know how to deal with it, that kind of protects them from getting caught up in a really, dangerous cycle. So let's ask this question of what is it that causes a child to bully others? And we can even reframe it, what causes any person, a human, to bully another person? What do you guys think are the reasons why?
Low self-esteem.
Okay, but why? Why would the low self-esteem, cause that?
Well,
Perhaps
if you think poorly of yourself, then you're going to find ways to put other people down, to bring them down to your perceived level.
Yeah. So you wanted to add something to that?
perhaps they're being abused at home.
Yes, so sometimes they're perpetuating abuse, meaning they are experiencing this kind of imbalance of power themselves, and that's the model that they've been given, and they just, this is the way that they understand how relationships work, right? They don't understand what a healthy relationship is meant to look like. That is possible. Very often, victims become abusers, sadly. So let's take a look at this text that we have here, text 5, from this book called Ego, Insecurity, and Destructive Narcissist. Okay. And this text looks at the inner psyche of that bully. So Alex, to your point about low self-esteem. So the bully's ego is artifice. It means it's really false. It's just, a facade. So he appears to be this inflated big bully, but in reality, his arrogance is hollow confidence. This ego for him is a fragile thing. It is driven by fear and narcissism, not by power, nor by the power he wishes so desperately to possess. He feeds on our fear, but his hunger is driven solely by his own. The key for the bullied, so this is in terms of the victim, is to recognize that the bully's bullying is not about us. It's about him and his weakness. It's about his sense of being threatened and his horror at being found out as an imposter or a poser. He is afraid, quite afraid, and all of the time. So absolutely, like you said, a person who is lacking in self-worth basically they feel a need to basically create an oppression, an appearance of self-worth, but it's all a facade on the outside. Internally, inside, there's deep, very fragile, total lack of belief in themselves completely. So the way that they they can create that feeling of power is by taking power away from others. And it's so sad when you see this happening, whether it's with adults. I'm sure you've experienced this in an adult level, in the adult world, whether with, in relationships or, at work, just in general. And it's really especially sad when you see it happening with, young children. It's not necessarily coming from a bad place, but it's coming from this place of deep pain and deep fear. Now, there's a really beautiful story that we have here it's on page 102, text 6, which this story is from, if you remember, in the last 2 weeks, we were reading the story of a father and a son, who was talking about what education is, right? So this story takes place with the father when he was a child. So when he was a child, his older brother was shorter than him. His older brother was shorter than him, and his older brother was, naturally felt very insecure, and it really bothered him that he was so noticeably, so much shorter than his younger sibling. So one day, this older brother, his nickname was the Raza. It was like short. His Hebrew name was Reb Zalman Aram. Reb is like, an acronym like, like a salutation. His name was Zalman Aram. So the RZA is short for Raza. That was his nickname. So the Raza sneaked up behind his brother when they were children, and he pushed him into a small ditch. And as like his younger brother like looks up to him in surprise, like, what just happened? His brother basically used the opportunity and pointed out, see, now I'm taller than you. He's standing there like above his little brother who's in the ditch. Now I'm taller than you. So his father, who was, the father of these two sons, who was the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shmuel of Lubavitch. I have to say my youngest son is named after him. That's why we have a Shmuel. So he saw this whole story happen with the kids. And so later he calls over the boys and he says, come here. And he tells the older son, who was shorter, can you go get a chair? So he goes, he brings a chair, and he tells the shorter son, the Raza, to stand on the chair. And he says, tell me, who's taller now? And the Raza was so excited. He said, yeah, now I am taller. And he answered him now with very deep line, such a beautiful story. He said, aha, there you are. To be bigger than your friend, there is no need to pull him down. Basically, you don't need to push him into a ditch. Simply elevate yourself. Rather than pushing him into a ditch, put yourself on a chair, and then you're going to be taller. This is really the truth, a truth about what is really the right way to build up your self-esteem is not by putting other people down, but rather by building yourself up and focusing on your own abilities. The problem is that in a bullying, for a bully, they don't realize that this is an aha moment that is missing for them. But the story really illustrates in a way to help children understand in such a simple way how to avoid allowing yourself to get caught up in this pattern of, oh, I need to feel bigger, so I'm going to push other people down. So let's take a minute now and look more deeply at this question of what is a healthy self-esteem, because when a person has a feeling of healthy self-esteem, they don't feel the need to push people down. The reason why he, put him in the ditch was to make himself feel bigger. But when a person feels to begin with taller, then they don't feel that need. So now let's kind of go back to the initial question, which was, how can we build a healthy self-esteem so that we can avoid this whole dynamic? Because I just want to take a second also to link this lack of self-esteem. It's not only about the bully feels a lack of self-esteem, also the victim. Because a child who feels truly confident in themselves has that ability and resilience to not react in an extreme way to the bully. And what research has shown is that when the victim reacts strongly, with anger, with aggression, with tears, whatever it is, when there is a strong reaction, then the bully identifies, okay, this is someone from whom I can take power. But if the victim, really was like, okay, whatever, brushes it off, was like, whatever, like, kind of that like really strong sense of confidence and a confident reaction, or even like puts the person back into their place, but not with any shred of insecurity, the bully just realizes, okay, this is not, there's not going to be able to be, there's no room here for a relationship where I can take power from this person. So how can we really create this healthy self-esteem? Because this can really protect our children from getting caught up in either end of the cycle. So the truth is, as we mentioned, before, that to really create healthy self-esteem, sorry, we have here just a second, you can see on the slide, risk factor for low self-esteem is that the bully choosing easy target, as we mentioned, the feeling timid, apprehensive, or unconfident, that's what the bully looks like in terms of targets. And that the bully themselves feels the need to esteem themselves, and their behavior becomes aggressive or dismissive or contemptuous. But to go back to this, beginning idea, Anna, that you already were like, you were there for the first 5 minutes. So really building healthy self-esteem includes two components. The true healthy self-esteem, it's not like a lot of times, we'll hear, parents will make fun of, especially if you're, not fifth generation American, make fun of the American version of self-esteem. Everybody gets a trophy, we all clap for everybody, make everybody feel good. But in that setting of everybody clapping and everybody feeling good and everybody getting a trophy, is that actually healthy self-esteem? In reality, it's not, because self-esteem is not achieved when everyone claps for you and you get a trophy for everything you do. It does not create a feeling because self-esteem, as we're defining it, is positive sense of yourself, how you view yourself, your own image of yourself in your own mind. And there's two aspects to it. One is believing I can, and the second is I am worthy. So that goes to two aspects. One is believing in your personal competence, that the child or the adult feels that they can accomplish and they can succeed. That means that you feel like you have the skills, you have the knowledge, like you're capable. I can do it. And the second aspect of healthy self-esteem is a feeling of intrinsic worth. The person feels that they are intrinsically valuable. And every time here where we're saying a child feels this way, it is true about adults. It is true about adults. When we feel and really believe and know that I am competent and I have intrinsic worth, I am valued, regardless of what I do, together these two ideas create a picture of a healthy self-esteem. And this is Judaism and Torah's view of what self-esteem can and should look like. Now, just to take a minute to explain why both of these are necessary, okay? This chart, let's take a second to look at it, okay? If we look at column A, right? Person A, okay? Child A feels competent and feels they're intrinsically worthy. So this child is able to do stuff, can achieve, and also believes that they are worthy of love and they're, valuable no matter what. Then you look at further down the same column, child C. This child feels competent but doubts whether or not they really are worthy. That's possible. Sometimes you can have a child that knows that, listen, if I work hard, I will get my stuff done. But they question, am I really worthy of love, for example? Adults that have the same experience. So it's possible to feel competent, but at the same time, not necessarily believe that you have intrinsic worth. But both, person A and person C will be able to achieve. They will achieve. But the child C will still experience a feeling of lack of confidence in terms of their own belief in themselves, particularly in relationships. They will doubt whether they truly are worthy. Then obviously, and you look at the second column, which is when you have someone who feels incompetent, even if they feel intrinsically worthy, so they're maybe in terms of their relationships, will seek out loving relationships, will feel like they can be loved, will seek out positive, friendships, but they're going to lack the self-confidence to do in terms of action and achievement. And obviously, let's say child D is struggling in both. So really, if we look at the ideal, what we're striving for is to raise our children with that A, where they're able to have both, because both a feeling of competency and intrinsic self-worth together create that truly healthy feeling, sense of positive self-image. So let's look now from a sense of parenting perspective, okay? What would be parenting techniques that help our children feel more competent? Any thoughts?
Positive reinforcement when they deserve it.
Okay, good. So when they deserve it, meaning not just like random praise, but when like they did something, they achieved something, and reinforcing it.
Yeah.
Great. Anyone else have an idea?
My camera's not on. Hi, Khani. This is Dan. But one of the things I try to do, especially with Aviv, who's 4 now, is let them try to do something on their own, even if they don't succeed at it. That at least you kind of like let them try and fail to do it, and then maybe show them the right way to do it after.
Excellent. So basically, independence. And when we give our children that opportunity to try, you literally are showing them, I believe you're competent, right? Like we've talked about how kids need to see. We can't just talk, but they learn, they take messages from our actions and what we actually do, right? Like we said, we shouldn't worry about what our kids are going to hear us saying, but more what they're watching us do. So when we treat our children from that sense of, I believe that you're competent. In education, we call this, especially in early childhood, there's a lot of talk about the image of the child and how adults view children. And if an adult, let's say, views a child from a sense of, oh, they're so fragile, they need my help, come, let me help you. And many times this is coming from places of real love. It's coming from a place of love. We want to nurture our children. We see them, it's because we see them as being invaluable. They're so precious. So we kind of like run around them. But what we're also doing is taking away their feeling of competency. So absolutely, that's a great way of how to build in this feeling of competency. Anyone have another technique to add to this?
I mean, I think that letting them fail is even though it sounds a little counterintuitive, it's a way of building their confidence, because once they get that aha moment and they figure out a way of doing it, whether, as Dan pointed out, you help them or they figure it out themselves, it really does build the confidence that I can do it instead of having everything spoon-fed to me all the time, and having them realize the fact that they did it themselves and what the steps were to achieve what they wanted to do.
Right. So you hit on this point of like the risk of failure. Very many times, some of the reasons why we withhold from giving our children independence, because also coming from a place of love, we want to protect them from disappointment. We want to protect them from experiencing or feeling failure. So we're doing it right for a good place. But we also have to remember that our role and responsibility as parents is to see the big picture and the long-term goals and objectives, which is to help prepare our children for life. And when they fail with us, it is much safer than when if they've never failed in their childhood and they have to experience the first time of failure when they're adults, and the stakes are much higher. I just want to share a memory that I'm having now as we're having this conversation. One of my once had a conversation with one of my cousins. Grew up in a big family, I was interested to hear, what she recalls her parents did well, that she would, get some advice. So she said that she feels, and she gave a lot of credit to her father, who she feels raised the children with a feeling that they can do anything. So I asked her, how did you, because all the kids in the family are very confident. How did he do that? So without blinking an eye, she said, because he would let us do stuff, like big things. Like he would say, here's a check, go into the bank, go deposit it. And that was it. And he spoke to us in a way like he believed we could do it and get it done. And we went and we had to figure it out and whatever. But we quickly learned that we're capable of doing these, big responsibilities. And that's created this real sense of competency in us, and also confidence that we can do things. So there are many things that we can do as parents to create this feeling of competency. What about the feeling of intrinsic worth? What parenting techniques can we use that would help our children feel that they are intrinsically valuable? Now, before, I just want to take a second to elaborate on this. If we look at text 7 in the book, there's this really important text that highlights really the importance of this. So there's a famous Jewish, a rabbi / psychologist. I don't know if you ever heard of him, Rabbi Abraham Tversky. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant man. Written many books, spoken a lot, really led the way in terms of things like addiction and abuse from a Jewish / psychological perspective. He should live to many years. So he wrote this book called Let Us Make Man. Anyways, if you Google him, you'll probably find some really great talks that he's shared. Really recommend them. Anyways, so this is the passage. As I studied the negative self-image problem, I found that the most profound feelings of low self-esteem paradoxically occur most often in those who are in reality most gifted and competent. Isn't that interesting? I'm sure you've seen this with your kids. Sometimes you have a child who's so capable and gifted, often receives praise. You praising them, you're telling them how amazing they are, and they get lots of positive feedback from their teachers, from the adults in their life, and they're clearly competent, and yet they lack self-esteem. So this is what he says. He says, it appears that the person who develops a negative self-image sees himself as if he were looking through a trick lens, which distorts the perception in such a manner that the person sees himself as the opposite of what he actually is. So for some reason, many times, even a gifted person, kind of the lens that they view themselves from is from a very judgmental, critical lens, and they see themselves in the exact opposite reverse. They see themselves totally, in the other way. So there has to be a way in which we raise our children with a message that you have intrinsic value that is not only linked to what you can do, that just because of who you are, you have value. So how can we raise our children with this sense of that they are, worthy just because they are?
Just raising them in a loving family. I think that's probably a foundation to all self-esteem, and just making sure that you don't, especially when you have multiple children at home, that you don't try and differentiate between them and be actually, super careful about that. Because those things, especially as they get into the adolescent age, they start picking up those things. And actually, interesting you said it, Khani, because when we growing up for us, our father also told us that we can do anything. And we grew up as girls, 3 girls in a predominantly a very traditional household. Right. But for him, it was like, you can do anything. You want to be an artist? Go ahead, you can be an artist. Diana went to Parsons to major in interactive design. You didn't necessarily have to be a doctor or lawyer. And so that point I also agree with is just encourage and let children try. And if they fail, like Alex said, they fail, and they'll just go on and move on to the next thing. But I think loving just having a warm environment and loving environment, and hopefully where, father and a mother also get along and respect each other, and set an example.
Right. And it almost sounds like you're describing that loving environment creates a feeling that each individual member of the household and family are worthy of love and are valued. And that emotion.
Right. And even if they're different.
Right. Even if they're different. That's a very important point, as we're going to see, that a really key piece of this is also tuning into the child's individuality as an important part of it, because that the feeling of, I am valued for who I am is linked to seeing yourself as an individual. That's a very good point.
I was just going to actually meant the same thing as Anna, just making sure that your kids know that you love them unconditionally. That
Right.
You're always there for them, so they know that.
Yes. That idea of unconditional love is challenged the most when your kids mess up. It's easy for us to say, when everything's going well and they're making good choices and, day to day, I love you no matter what. Always remember, I love you no matter what. And then in that moment when they mess up, and that's that moment.
Well, as long as they take responsibility and they're honest about it, I think it's important for them to know that we might not like everything they do, but it's for their own good.
Right. Absolutely. And making that distinction between the child and their behavior. So I'm disappointed with what the choice you made and with what you did, and you're going to need to be you need to be responsible about it. But I love you, and actually the reason why I'm coming to you and talking to you about it is coming because from a place of love. Yes, so that's a really important part, is raising children with that feeling of unconditional love. Now, there are also things that parents can do that can negatively harm a child's self-esteem. We're not going to focus so much on that in this class. That's going to be next week. But we're going to talk more about these first two components of things that we can do to help our children feel more competent and valuable. So there's two really interesting letters from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he gave guidance and advice to either was parents or educators, where you see he illustrates and highlights both of these ideas. So we're going to read first the first text. It's on text 8 on page 105. Would anyone like to read it? I'm not sure who has the text in front of them.
No problem.
Thank you.
So you surely know that nowadays such problems with children are very common. Usually the final decision as to how to deal with children who have such problems lies with the administration of the school, after discussing the situation with parents and being advised of the way the child is handled at home. It is also well to bear in mind that a significant number of such problems are usually straightened out in the course of time. What surprises me is that there is a factor in the situation which is rarely, if ever, used. This is to give a problem child a role of leadership with a group of younger children through some school activity and the like. This usually goes a long way to encourage the child's self-confidence, as well as making the child more sociable, etc. I trust that this method could be used also in your situation, of course, with your approval and under the supervision of school administration.
So we don't know exactly what the problem was that the writer to the Rebbe was referring to, like what they had reached out, what the issue that they were dealing with this child. But what's interesting is that the Rebbe, and this is consistent with other initiatives that the Rebbe took with relation to children, where the Rebbe said that one key way to help address this problem, whatever the problem is by giving the child leadership opportunities. Because what happens when a child is given leadership opportunities is they're given a feeling of competence, right? Because they have responsibilities. So that leadership can be, let's say, something small like, hey, you can go to the bank and you can deposit that check. It can also be leadership in the household, here I'm going to put you in charge of, a certain responsibility. Or it could be, in outside of the home, like here was referring to, school setting, or, you can arrange things on your block or in your building, go get not now and, maybe after COVID, get a bunch of kids together and, you can, for example, in a lot of neighborhoods or in Israel, older kids will often create like backyard camps, bring a group of kids together, and for an hour or two, they lead them with activities. Now these things, it's not just, cute, but it actually inculcates a sense of competence in the child, where they get this feeling like, okay, I can do stuff. And what's interesting is how the Rabbi said that this can resolve a variety of different issues that the child might be dealing with. And literally that line, this usually goes a long way to encourage the child's self-confidence. That was interesting. And basically how it's like this cycle that really, feeds on itself. The second letter that we have here is similar idea. It is very appropriate and worthwhile for school principals and teachers to recommend and encourage the students, boys and girls, including and especially those who have not yet reached the age of bar bat mitzvah, to increase their charitable activities. Reminds right, of what Michelle did. You said today you took her to go and help. That's also builds leadership and builds a feeling of confidence. I can contribute to the community. You took her to help with food distribution. Anyways, the Rabbi continues to describe a very specific and interesting idea. Namely, the students of each school or class should establish a free loan fund, and from time to time, each student should contribute of his or her own money to this fund. So it's kind of like you want to borrow some money for the snack bar kind of situation. In order to instill in the students' hearts the importance of personal charitable involvement and volunteer work, in addition to monetary generosity, it is most proper that these free loan funds be directed by the boys and girls themselves, not with an adult, not with a teacher, the kids themselves, with the students of the school or class choosing from amongst themselves a director, a treasurer, etc. Like they should have their own, responsibilities. The fact that this fund is being administered by the students' representatives will cause them to have a stronger feeling of responsibility and personal commitment to the cause, which will in turn increase their energy and enthusiasm as well. It would be best to alternate from time to time, by way of student votes, the directorship of the free loan fund, as well as its various management positions, in order, director, treasurer, bookkeeper, in order to enable all the students, or at the least a majority, to be not just donors of money, but also donors of their time and energy. So here again, you see this idea that the Rebbe has for, thinking out of the box. That the way to build self-esteem, it's not how we typically think of, or, what's described often is, it's not only about praise, it's about opportunities of responsibility and leadership, which create a feeling of competence. And think about kids being in, this is just one example of a model of where kids have this environment. But how those children feel about themselves, they feel fantastic, right? It's almost magical, and there are ways that you can bring such a model into your own home and household that, give these kids these opportunities. And that's really where, from a Jewish point of view, the idea of self-value and self-esteem is linked to actions and actually doing something. Just to give us, even let's say on a level of a very young child, when a kid finally figures out how to tie shoes, or really little, they figure out how to put their pants on, right? Or their shoes, the look on the child's face, that glow, that pride, that's where self-esteem is built. That's where it is. It's, as you said, Elaine, in the beginning, it's praising them when they actually achieve something. And they almost in that moment don't even need your praise. They feel that good feeling all on their own because it's natural. The more we create opportunities for them to get that glow, that feeling of like, I can do this, the better. And the more it creates this feeling of self-belief. Now, there's also a need for personalizing it because different kids are different, especially if you have different children in the household. You'll see that they all will build their competency differently. And it doesn't have to mean that every child has the exact same chores or every child is given the same sense of leadership. Their temperaments are different. They'll access that feeling of that, I can do this in a different way. And personalization is very important. I'm sure you've heard this, many times before. If you ever, know anything about Jewish education, you have this quote from, Proverbs from King Solomon that, educate a child according to his way, and even when he grows old, he will not turn away. Because really, you have to look at each individual child. We just finished the holiday of Pesach a few weeks ago, and a big part of the Haggadah is the 4 sons. And what's interesting is this is just one example of many different times in Torah where there's reference made that different children or different people need a customized approach. For the child that is like this, you talk to him this way. The son that is like that, you talk to him that way. This child, you deal with him in this way. You don't talk, you do something. Every child needs a different approach. And the key is knowing your individual child and thinking about ways that I can help this specific child tap into being their best self. Not being your best child, but rather their best self. If we think back to this main message that we've been here, talking about from the very first class, is that our children are alone to us. They have been given a specific, unique mission that they need to achieve in this world. And they're different than us. We have one mission to achieve. They have something else to accomplish. Our responsibility as parents is to help them channel their unique personality, their unique characteristics to become their best self. So we have this interesting text here. It's on page 108. Anyone want to read it? It really gives some interesting insights into ways that we can channel our children's unique personalities.
I can read.
Thank you.
We cannot escape our innate personality, but we can choose how to channel it. We can utilize our inborn nature for positive, negative, or neutral causes. Thus, the Talmud says that a person born with a violent nature who is inclined to spill blood can turn out to be a mohel, circumciser, or a shohid, ritual slaughterer, or a murderer. This illustrates how the same nature can be utilized for a wholly objective circumcision, a neutral purpose, slaughtering animals, or an evil end, murder. Hence, the verse instructs us to educate the child according to his way, in a manner that is consistent with the child's nature. For then, even when he grows old, he will not turn away. If, however, we attempt to compel a child to act in a manner that is inconsistent with his or her nature, the child may listen to us now, in deference to our authority, but afterwards, when the child matures and sheds the yoke of our authority, he or she will turn away from the education we provided, for it tried to accomplish the impossible, the alteration of person's innate nature.
Really very wise words. They were written by the Rabbi Elio of Vilna, and he really provides this really important insight that in parenting our children, it's very important for us to tune into who they are uniquely, and how even their negative traits, right, through personalized responsibilities can be channeled into a positive direction. So for example, even something as extreme as a murderer, like someone who has that tendency, right, that urge for blood, when you give them responsibilities on a communal level, like being, a shochet or, circumcision, then they're able to basically take on a very positive leadership role. So it's not really that, a child is born a certain way, right? When we kind of channel them and direct them in a positive direction, it can really help raise them in a, with a good outcome. And we have another text from Rabbi Steinsaltz, also another very brilliant scholar from Israel, Rabbi Din Steinsaltz. Also, definitely read anything that he has out there. So he has a very short paragraph. This is text 11 on page 109, where he says, parenting is like tending a garden. To properly care for it, you first have to know what you have in it. Do you have potatoes? Do you have roses? Do you have thorns? Then you have to take care and nurture each organism according to its unique needs. I love the metaphor here, the symbolism. You have to raise each child in their own unique way. If they're a potato, then you want them to be the best potato that they can be, right? If they're a rose, then you want them to be the best rose, but you can't raise a rose the way you would raise a potato, and you can't raise a potato the way you would raise a rose. And that, as you were saying, Anna, about that, creating that framework for individuality and embracing individuality is really important part also of creating a child with a healthy self-esteem. Because let's think about it in reverse. If you're taking a child who is a potato and you're treating them the way you would treat a rose, how is that potato going to feel about themselves? Like, I'm worthless. I will never be a rose, no matter what. It's not going to happen. So I guess there's no point of me being me. I don't even know why I was created or born, because here I am, just a stinky potato. But if you raise that potato as a potato and show them that, potatoes can be, I don't know, what's a really gourmet potato dish, then they'll feel great being a potato, and they really will be their best self, right? And the same way with a rose, it really, you can't raise, a rose in the same way that you would another child. So the feeling of positive self-image is linked to how if we really accept and embrace each child for who they are as they are, including their negative traits. This is also difficult. Sometimes when we see our children's negative traits, we're frustrated. We don't like them. We want them to be gone. But when we speak about unconditional love, or we talk about, in adult relationships, like you have to be able to accept your beloved, for who they are in totality. It applies to our children too. It doesn't mean that we're not going to guide them. Like, we said before, I can say, I don't approve of your behavior and your choices. I'm not trying to change you. That was what Rabbi Eliyahu was trying to say, which I think is really powerful. Now, there's something really fascinating. You can take some time afterwards if you, especially if you have the text in front of you. We have this. This is Learning Exercise 4 on page 110. So this is taken from a book that was developed by two psychologists. They created a list of character strengths and virtues. And if you have the text in front of you, this is a great exercise that you can do on your own time. And they basically really outlined, key characteristics that, human beings have. And just an interesting self-reflection to ask yourself, with regard to each of these areas, does this describe my child or not? Just in terms of looking at your child's character, looking at their strengths, their weaknesses, their personality, and thinking about, I really want to get to know my child's unique characteristics, because what I want to do is help them be their best self. So this is a great exercise that I do, suggest and recommend taking some time to, look at, maybe together with your spouse. It can be a fun exercise. Let's, think about this kid or that kid if you have more than one. Where do we see them? And really getting to know, like we, as Shlomo Melech said in Proverbs, getting to know their unique self and trying to help them build their, best self forward, which is going to be different than you, different than your spouse, and different even from their siblings. Now, we're going to conclude with a little bit, just to kind of really deepen more this idea of intrinsic worth. So there's this really beautiful idea, a quote that I once read by Rabbi Simon Jacobson. If you're familiar with the book Toward a Meaningful Life, which basically outlines a lot of the wisdom of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in a very user-friendly way, it was written by Rabbi Simon Jacobson, who was he was one of the scholars in 770 who would basically help with recording the Rebbe's talks. So he has this line that he took as was basically inspired by what he learned from the Rebbe over all the years that he was there. And the line basically is that the fact that I am born is God's way of telling me that I matter. And from Judaism's point of view, when we speak about intrinsic worth or unconditional love and acceptance, it's really linked to our faith and belief in Hashem. And this is truly a message that we want to tell our children, that the very fact that Hashem gave you life, put you in this world, put you here into our family, is Hashem's way of saying that you have value and there's something unique that only you can contribute to this world. And your worth lies in your very existence. Not even necessarily anything you're doing, but just the fact that you are alive means that you matter. So when we speak to our children in this way, by showing that unconditional love, by also explaining to a child that who they really are is, they're a piece of God. And what this means is that, who you are is you're not just a body, you're also a soul. You have a spiritual side, and God has invested a piece of himself. That's what a soul is. A soul is a piece of God himself within us. God has invested a piece of himself within you. Now, why would he do that? He's doing that because he believes in you. Now, if God believes in you, now this is the fascinating part. Why raising our children with this knowledge that Hashem loves them is an additional layer on top of parental love that has really amazing value, because we all expect our parents to love us, right? So they expect that we're going to, tell them, I love you. Sometimes like I'll tell my kids all the time, I love you. And my kids, I see it. They almost brush it off like, okay, you're always telling us that, right? I know you love us. But there's another layer. It's not just that, I love you because I'm your mom, or your dad loves you because, you're your dad. God loves you. Now that means that there's a bigger picture here in the entire universe that thinks that you matter. Now you can't take that away. There's no way to say, well, I don't know what, this is it, right? There's no moving away from that. And it's not only for our children, by the way, it's also for us as adults too. You have to remember that Hashem believes in us as well. As going back to the very first text that we read, second text, that our belief in Hashem is linked to believing in ourselves. And just as we believe that Hashem is the creator of the universe, Hashem created us and he believes in us as well. And this is also linked to the fact that everyone has a mission. So we're going to read this last final text, another letter of the Rabbi, in which the Rabbi is writing to an adult. All right, and this adult, is writing to a parent or a teacher. We're not sure. And basically, this adult was reached out to the Rebbe for advice in terms of some issues that he was dealing with children. So I received your letter in which you asked my advice with regard to certain educational problems, especially how to influence the children to get rid of undesirable habits. So how do you help kids get rid of bad negative traits? Needless to say, these problems cannot be adequately discussed in a letter. Okay, I can't get into too much detail. However, I would like to make one general point which can be universally applied in educational problems, a point which is emphasized in the teachings of Chassidus. And this is the key. If we can underline it, if we could highlight it, if we can have, confetti going around these words, this would be the moment. Ta-da! I refer to the effort to make the children aware that they possess a soul which is a part of God, and that they are always in the presence of God. When this is done persistently on a level which is suitable to the age group and background of the children come to realize that they possess a great and holy quality which is directly linked with God, the creator and master of the world, and that it would therefore be unbecoming and unworthy of them to do anything which is not good. At the same time, they come to realize that they have the potential to overcome temptation or difficulty. And if they would only make some effort on their part, and they would receive considerable assistance from on high to live up to the Torah and mitzvot, which constitute the will and wisdom of God. So almost there is the way the Rabbi is describing is a sense of empowerment. You can do it. You know why you can do it? Because Hashem gave you the ability, right? Hashem believes in you. So even if you try to tell yourself like, I can't, I have all these, limitations, just reminding ourselves of that can really help us free ourselves from these, self-imposed limitations or negative self-view. Like, how can I say, I'm so stupid? But if you're linked to God, is God stupid? No. Well, there's a piece of God inside of you. So this kind of linking the child back to a higher purpose, which is similar to what we discussed last time in terms of raising children with a healthy sense of authority, also bringing them back to that feeling of sense of connection to Hashem, really elevates the child's, view of themselves in general. That was, I thought, a really beautiful letter where the Rebbe, describes this elevated view, which we can bring to the child as well, which really helps them from a very young age develop this true positive and healthy view of themselves. So the self-esteem is not exaggerated. It's not false self-esteem. But what we're talking about, is when we put all of this together, when we raise a child with this feeling of competency because we give them opportunities and they see that they actually can. When we raise a child with this sense of, I accept you unconditionally for who you are in your own unique way. When we raise a child also with this layer of the sense of, you have worth because of your unique divine mission. The world is counting on you to achieve. This is what positive, healthy self-esteem looks like from Judaism's point of view, and that enables a child to then, achieve really, truly amazing, great things. So I want to leave you with this exercise for the week, which is to take some time to look at that exercise of the strengths that this child has, and try to think about specific activities or responsibilities that will highlight that strength. So let's say, for example, in that exercise, you identify generosity as a strength that your child has. So what would be a way that you can create an opportunity for your child to have a feeling of responsibility that's linked to that specific characteristic of generosity, that would then create, this feeling of competence as well as confidence in their own unique sense of self, right? Because there's a reason why God gave us all of our unique traits in order to achieve that unique mission. I also want to encourage everyone to read the additional reading articles. Alex, you shared that you read some of the previous ones. They're really, really good. And there's actually 2 great articles here. One is called, intriguing title, How to Land Your Kid in Therapy by Lori Gottlieb. Very, very good article. And the second one is entitled, Origins of Low Self-Esteem, and it's by that rabbi that I mentioned earlier, Rabbi Avram Tversky, that psychologist. All right, any questions that anyone wants to bring up, or specific scenarios or comments?
I think it's actually kind of interesting that we're learning about this today, because it coincides exactly with today's Tanya study about where the Alter Rebbe is talking about the exact same concept of teaching a person according to his ability, and why, even though that sounds counterintuitive, why do we do that? And basically the Alter Rebbe says that in order to teach a person right from wrong, you have to teach them both ways and let them choose which way to go.
Right. What hashgacha pratis, what divine providence, that it totally coincide and linked up. Yeah. And in order for the lessons to stick, that was the key of that phrase that Shlomo Melech said, King Solomon, that educate them according to their ways so that they will not depart from it, and it will stay with them for life. If we just, talk, but it's not linked to who they are as a person, it won't stick. Thank you for that. Thank you very much, everybody. It was really such a pleasure to learn together, and I'm really looking forward to the next, few classes. We have only 2 more, and I know as a parent in preparing and teaching the class, I've been definitely a lot, very conscious of many different things, and it just, by learning and discussing, it just really helps reinforce our parenting strategies and techniques. So I really hope that you've been finding this experience helpful for you in terms of raising your children, and especially in these very unique hopefully only once in a lifetime times that we're in. And when we're almost, really constantly parenting, there's no moment when we're not. I mean, we always were parenting before, but now it's, 500 times magnified by that. So God willing, we'll be able to see a lot of nachas, the good fruits and results of our work and our efforts.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you for your time.
And thank you guys for participating.
Thank you.
You have such great,
Thank you.
insights and ideas. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Chag
Shavuos.
Good night.
Yes.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Sameach.
Thank you.